The Texas sun showed no mercy that morning. It beat down on Caleb Bear Whitmore's spread like a blacksmith's hammer on hot steel. Bear, 34 and toughened by too many hard seasons, had seen rough days before, but this one carried a different weight. While he fixed a busted fence post near the creek, a flicker of motion tugged at the corner of his eye. A small shape wobbled toward the water, weaving like she might fall at any second. It was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9. Even from far off, Bear could tell her clothes were ripped and sun-faded, the style clearly Comanche. In this part of Texas, most ranchers would have grabbed a rifle first and asked questions later. Tension between settlers and the Comanche had simmered for years and sometimes exploded into raids and bloodshed. But Bear wasn't like most men. He set his tools down and walked forward slow, hands open, every step steady and clear. As he came close, he saw her face. Big dark eyes filled a thin, tired face. Her lips were split dry, telling of days without a drink. She looked up at him, fear and need mixing in her gaze, and spoke quickly in Comanche. He didn't understand the words, but he didn't have to. She pointed to her mouth, then toward the creek. Water. Food. Help. He paused. He thought about the neighbors, and how fast gossip rode the wind in these parts. He remembered the warnings in town, trouble growing with the tribes, tempers hot as August. The safe choice, the easy choice, was to walk away. Then he met her eyes again and saw the same hollow ache he had carried since the day a fever took his wife and son 3 years before. The grief felt like a mirror. His mind settled. Without speaking, Bear lifted her into his arms. She was light as a bundle of sticks, shaking from fear, hunger, and thirst. Inside his plain cabin, he set her in his only chair and moved with purpose. A pot of yesterday's stew still sat on the stove, and a loaf of bread cooled on the counter. The smell alone seemed to wake something in the girl, and for the first time he noticed a faint spark of hope in her tired eyes. As he filled the bowl, he noticed the necklace around her neck, tight beadwork in a pattern he recognized. His heart went still. Just last week, old Pete Morrison had described those beads to him, the sacred design worn by the family of Iron Wolf, the fiercest Comanche leader in the territory. If the girl was who he suspected, he wasn't just helping a lost child. He was sheltering the daughter of a man who could send 200 riders to flatten his ranch before sunrise. And not far away, that's exactly what had begun. Iron Wolf had found signs of his girl and was riding hard, rage and grief burning like coals in his chest. When the sun slid low and long shadows draped Bear's land, the girl slept in his chair, wrapped in his one wool blanket. Her breaths were still shallow, but no longer ragged. Stew and bread had given her body something to hold on to. Bear sat at the table, staring into the small flame of a kerosene lamp while his thoughts churned. He hadn't just fed a native child. He had taken in this child, the daughter of a name whispered from Amarillo to Abilene. Iron Wolf was more than a leader. He was a storm, a fighter, who had pulled tribes together and smashed patrols without mercy. If he believed his daughter had been harmed or stolen, there would be no careful talk. There would be fire. The faint thud of hooves tugged Bear out of his worry. At first he thought he was imagining things. Then the sound grew clearer, steady, hard, sure. His stomach dropped. He stood, looked out the window, and saw 3 riders racing the dirt road. Cletus Hartwell led them, with Deputy U.S. Marshal Eli Cart and Reverend Samuel Pike close behind. Bear stepped out before they could swing down from their saddles, hoping to keep their voices low and let the girl sleep. Cletus didn't give him the chance. "Bear, you fool, what in God's name are you doing?" he shouted as his horse slid to a stop. Jake Morrison's face had gone pale. "Smoke signals went up in the hills this afternoon. The Comanche are searching. Word is Iron Wolf's daughter's been missing since the storm 3 nights back. Bear, you know anything about that?" Bear felt the lie rise and fall before it reached his tongue. He thought about sending them away and handling it alone, but these men were his neighbors, for better or worse. "She's inside," he said quietly, "half-starved and worn out. I couldn't let her die." Silence hung between them. Reverend Pike rubbed his beard and spoke soft. "Son, Do you understand what you've done? You've got the chief's own blood in your house. He won't ask questions first. He'll bring the thunder. They'll think you took her, and they won't wait for proof. Cletus nodded darkly. He's wiped out settlements for less. Jake swung back into his saddle. I have to report this, Bear. It's my duty. But I'll give you a head start. Get her back to her people before they reach you. If you're still here when they come, he didn't finish. God help you. Bear's voice felt tight. She can barely stand. How am I supposed to walk into a Comanche camp without getting filled with arrows? Jake's face hardened. That's your trouble now. I'm warning the town. If Iron Wolf decides to make an example, he may not stop with your place. The three men wheeled and disappeared into blackness, their hoofbeats fading into the night. On the porch, Bear stood frozen, listening to the sound die away. Inside, the girl stirred and shifted under the blanket. Then another sound lifted the hairs on his neck, the deep, steady pulse of drums riding the wind. Soft at first, then louder. He knew what it meant. They weren't waiting for dawn. They were coming now. He barred the door and felt his heart slam against his ribs. The girl sat up, eyes wide. The drums had pulled her from sleep too. She spoke fast in Comanche, pointing to the door and then to herself, hands shaking. Bear understood the fear without the words. He knelt beside her. I know you can't understand me, little one, but I'm trying to help. Those drums, they're your people, aren't they? She nodded, tears welling, then grabbed his sleeve and pulled him to the window. She lifted her hands and opened and closed her fingers over and over. Bear counted in his head 10, 20, 30, until she stopped at 200. 200 riders. His knees went weak. He had hoped for a handful of angry young men he could reason with. 200 was enough to erase half the county. The drum stopped, and the stillness that followed felt heavier than the beat. He peered out. For a moment he saw nothing, and then they appeared like the prairie itself had given them shape, mounted warriors sliding out of the sea of grass in the moonlight. They formed a wide half-circle that tightened around the cabin. War paint shone. Feathers quivered in the night air. Every rider carried a weapon ready to use. This was not a group come to talk. It was the razor's edge, and one wrong motion would slice it open. Silence pressed on the land until even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. At the center of the ark, on a big chestnut stallion, sat Iron Wolf. He looked like a thing carved from the land itself. Broad shoulders, tall in the saddle, long black hair threaded with silver, old scars mapping past fights. His eyes burned with a heat that could have set dry grass aflame. Bear glanced at the child beside him. She clutched his sleeve hard, shook her head, and drew a line across her throat with a trembling hand. He didn't know her words, but he knew the meaning. One voice rose from the dark, deep and sure, English thick with accent, but clear as a bell. White man, it called, we know you hold what is ours. Send out the girl, and maybe you will live to see the morning. The power in that sound rattled Bear's bones. It had to be the chief himself. Fear clawed at him like it had the day illness stole his family, but this time he wasn't. Helpless. There was still a chance, thin as a thread, that he could steer what came next. He drew a breath, opened the door, and stepped outside with his hands up, palms empty. The girl stayed close to his side, shaking, but her chin lifted. They faced a wall of still faces and tight muscles. One mistake, and 200 arrows would fly. Iron Wolf swung down from his horse. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud that sent a shiver up Bear's spine. He walked forward, slow and measured, and stopped an arm's length away. Saddles creaked behind him as warriors shifted, a sound like a warning growl. My daughter says you fed her, Iron Wolf said, voice cold. You gave her shelter. Bear's legs felt unsteady, but his voice held. Yes. She was starving. I couldn't let a child die. The chief studied him for a long, punishing moment. Then his eyes tightened. She also says you saw the sacred beads of our family. You knew who she was and did not return her. The words struck hard. Bear had hoped her truth would calm the storm, but it cut the other way. I was going to bring her at first light, he said, tripping over the words. She was too weak to travel in the dark. The chief's tone sank lower. Or you thought to keep her. Trade her back for horses, cattle, safe passage. The charge hung thick in the air. The bear could feel 200 eyes waiting for a signal. That isn't true, he said, steady again. I wanted nothing. I just couldn't watch a child suffer. But doubt flickered across the chief's face, and some younger warriors shifted forward, hungry for a fight. The girl tugged at her father's sleeve and spoke in quick Comanche. Her small voice rose and fell with fierce wind. Iron Wolf listened, face unreadable. When she finished, he looked at Bear. She says you could have turned her away. You could have let her die. Instead you carried her, gave food and your blanket, and asked for nothing. Bear nodded once. That's right. I don't have a quarrel with your people. I work my ground and try to live in peace. Something softened in the chief's eyes, barely there. But the murmurs behind him swelled, and Bear heard a word repeated. Wasatchu, white man, spoken like a thorn. A young warrior with a long scar across his cheek nudged his horse forward and leveled a spear at Bear. He snapped out a sharp string of words. Iron Wolf's jaw hardened. He says any white man who touches a Comanche child must pay. The air crackled as if lightning was about to strike. Bear's breath went thin. If he had to die, he would do it standing. Before the spear could inch closer, the little girl moved. She stepped between Bear and the ring of riders, her small body a single, brave line. Her voice rang clear as she poured out words in her tongue. The crowd hushed. Even the angry young man lowered his spear a hand's width, shock bending his rage. Iron Wolf listened, and then spoke, softer now. She tells how the storm lost her, how she walked for days without food or water, ready to die on the grass until you found her. The girl turned and faced the warriors, arms wide, speaking louder. Bear watched faces hardened by battle begin to bend. She says, if we punish kindness, we become the monsters the white men claim we are. The chief translated. Stillness sat on the circle. The scarred rider spoke again, but quieter. Iron Wolf nodded. He says maybe the spirit sent a teacher, not an enemy. That wisdom can come from small voices. Bear felt his shoulders sag with relief, but the chief lifted a hand. Do not thank me. My men came for justice. They cannot ride home empty. If they do, I lose their trust. Bear swallowed. What do you ask of me? The chief's answer was grave. Only one way holds both honor and justice. But it will ask something of you that may be harder than dying. They rode toward the Comanche village under a cold moon, no one speaking. Bear followed Iron Wolf with warriors all around him like walls. No one lifted a weapon, but every eye stayed on him. The girl sat behind her father and clung to his waist, glancing back at Bear now, and then with a look he couldn't name. Worry, hope, maybe both. They crossed sharp canyons and narrow paths Bear had never seen, secret veins known to those born here. His thoughts ran wild. He had no idea what waited for him in the heart of their camp. Would he be heard, or would this be where his story ended? When they reached a ridge, the sight below stole his breath. Dozens of fires tossed orange light across a ring of teepees. Shadows moved, men sharpening spears, women tending coals, children peeking out from behind skirts. Iron Wolf raised a hand, and the party slowed. They led Bear to the center. He slid down from his saddle under the gaze of 100 eyes. 7 elders sat in a half-circle by a roaring fire, faces lined by wind and years, hair braided with strands of gray and white, feathered cloaks stirring in the breeze. Their stares landed like arrows. Iron Wolf spoke to them in Comanche, voice deep and sure. Bear didn't know the words, but the weight of the moment pressed hard. The girl stood near her father, holding his hand. When the chief finished, the eldest rose. He was thin as a fence post and old as rock, but his presence filled the space. He spoke softly and waited for Iron Wolf to translate. We have heard what you did. Some call you an honorable man. Others say you are a deceiver who lured the chief's daughter. Tonight we will learn which is true. Bear's mouth was dry, but he didn't drop his eyes. I didn't lure her, he said. She was alone and starving. I gave food and shelter because it was right. I asked for nothing." The elder's face didn't change. Then the young warrior from before broke an arrow, stepped into the firelight, rage twisting his features. He spoke with heat, pointing his spear at Bear. Iron Wolf's voice went grim as he translated. He says no white man can be trusted. He says you must pay with your life for touching a child of this tribe. Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Hands tightened on spears and bows. Bear felt his pulse pound in his ears. The girl stepped forward again, her voice small but growing. She pointed to Bear, then to herself, and mimed eating and sleeping. Words tumbled from her like water over stone. As Iron Wolf translated, his voice softened. She tells of the storm, of days without food or water, of how she would have died until this man found her. She turned to Broken Arrow, eyes blazing, and spoke with such heart that even he hesitated. She asks if he has children, the chief said. She asks what he would want a stranger to do if his child were starving and lost. The crowd stilled. Broken Arrow's fierce mask slipped. His spear dipped a little, though his jaw held tight. The girl kept going. The chief's tone deepened. She says if we punish kindness, we become like soldiers who kill first and ask later. She says mercy is not weakness. Mercy is strength. The oldest elder rose again and looked over everyone like coals glowing in his eyes. Then he faced Bear. "Do you swear," Iron Wolf translated, "that if any of our people come to you hungry, hurt, or lost, you will show them the same care you showed this child?" Bear didn't blink. "I swear," he said. "I want no war with your people. I want peace." The elder nodded and spoke to the gathered tribe, his words carrying the weight of long years. When he finished, the chief explained, "The council has decided. You will not die tonight. The spirits set a test, and you passed. You may return to your land. More than that, you are under our protection. Any Comanche who harms you or what is yours will answer to us." Relief poured through Bear like rain on a dry field. He almost missed the girl running to him and wrapping her arms around his waist. In broken English, she whispered, "You saved me when I had nothing. Now I save you." Dawn stretched pale light across the plains as Bear rode home, not as a man marked for death, but as someone changed. The night had felt ready to explode, the fear so thick it seemed the air itself might spark. Yet the worst did not happen. Somehow, in the heart of a circle built for war, he had earned respect from people who had every reason to hate him. On either side of him rode an honor guard, Comanche warriors flanking him like a living shield. The paint that had looked frightening in moonlight now shone like ceremony in the soft morning. Iron Wolf rode among them, his eyes still sharp but no longer burning with rage, now holding a careful respect. His daughter rode close to her father, sitting tall, no longer the starving child who had staggered across Bear's land. At the cabin, Iron Wolf dismounted and took in the broad sweep of prairie before turning back to Bear. "Much blood for my people and yours has soaked this ground," he said. "Last night you showed something rare, mercy, when fear would have driven other men to grab guns. Because of that, there will be no more blood here." Bear swallowed. "I didn't do it for praise," he said quietly. "I saw a child who needed help." The chief's face softened as he gestured toward the girl. "She will not forget you, and neither will I. From this day, your ranch is a place of peace. Any Comanche who harms you or yours will answer to me. But you must keep your promise. If any of my people come to you hungry, wounded, or lost, you will help as you helped her." "I'll keep it," Bear said without a pause. Iron Wolf reached out. Bear took his hand. It was a simple clasp, but it felt heavy with meaning. A bridge between two worlds laid down by two men who had every reason never to meet in the middle. The warriors turned their horses and moved off into the brightening haze, fading like spirits into the rising sun. The girl lifted a small hand to wave before she disappeared among them. In the months after, word spread across the frontier. Neighbors who once called Bear too soft for such a hard land began to speak of him in quiet tones filled with something near respect. A strange thing happened on his place. It became somewhere two sides could step without reaching for weapons first. One evening, an older Comanche woman came to Bear's door, her arm cut badly from a fall. He cleaned and wrapped the wound, gave her bread and coffee, and sent her safely on her way. A few days later, two young men left fresh venison on his porch and rode off without a word. Weeks after that, a settler snapped a wagon axle near Bear's boundary. The man, hard-eyed and suspicious of native people, was stunned to see a small group of Comanche lift the wagon from the mud and help him fix it. When he asked why, the oldest among them answered in plain English, "This is Bear's land. Here we do not fight." It wasn't a treaty written on paper. It wasn't soldiers keeping watch. It was something more delicate and stronger at the same time. A small piece held together by one man's choice and a child's brave voice. Years passed, and the little girl became a young woman, respected among her people. She learned English and served as a bridge between her tribe and the settlers, helping translate and cool hot tempers when trouble sparked. Every year, on the night that had once held 200 riders like a ring of flint around Bear's home, she returned to his porch to share a meal. They would sit with bowls of stew and slices of bread, staring out at the rolling grass, talking softly about loss and luck and the winding path that had tied their lives together. Bear never got rich. He never became famous. But he lived with quiet honor, trusted by both whites and Comanche. He grew old there, the wind carving deeper lines through his weathered face, the porch boards smoothing under his boots. When Bear died at 73, he didn't pass alone. Comanche warriors stood shoulder to shoulder with settlers at his grave, heads bowed in the same silence. Iron Wolf's daughter, now a mother herself, laid wildflowers and a small string of sacred beads on the dirt. "You fed me when I had nothing," she whispered. "You showed us what mercy means. Rest easy." In the years after, his ranch came to stand for something more than cattle and fences. Folks told how, on this ground, enemies had once stood ready to tear each other apart and instead chose to understand. Stories of Bear's courage and steady kindness rode the wind across the prairie, reminding anyone who listened that small acts of grace can stop great disasters before they begin. Time kept rolling over the open plains, and Caleb Whitmore aged with each season. What had once felt like a lonely outpost became a quiet haven. The ranch was more than ground for grazing and boards to mend. It turned into a crossing point, a place for breathing room where anger lost its grip. Every year, on the anniversary of the night the circle of riders formed around his cabin, Bear took his place on the porch and watched the grass ripple. Without fail, she came, not the hungry child he had carried, but a strong, calm woman with braided hair threaded with beads. Among her people and with the settlers, she served as a peacekeeper, speaking both languages and holding tempers down when sparks flew. But when she stepped onto Bear's porch, she was just Niley again, the girl he had once saved. They kept their meals simple, bread and venison stew, and their words honest. They spoke about how far things had moved and how close they had once come to losing everything in a single night. "I remember your face," Niley said one evening, her voice gentle as the wind. "You looked like a man holding up the whole prairie. But you didn't send me away." Bear chuckled, his laugh rough with age but warm. "All I saw was a little girl who needed help," he said. "I wasn't thinking about much else." Truth was he had been thinking about a lot. Fear of Iron Wolf, fear of the neighbor's judgment, fear of dying for doing the right thing. Yet that small choice, offering food and a blanket, had rippled outward in ways he never could have guessed. Over time, his place earned a simple name, Neutral Ground. Warriors and settlers came, sometimes in secret, to talk, to trade, to find a way to share space without tearing it apart. Hate did not vanish, but in that small corner of Texas, it stopped ruling every heart. When Bear's time ended, he slipped away in his sleep. Comanche and settlers stood together as the wind moved through the tall grass. Niley set a bundle of flowers and a single white feather on the raised earth. "He fed me when I had nothing," she told those gathered, voice steady. "He taught us that kindness is stronger than fear." Her words drifted out across the fields like birds lifting into the light. For years afterward, people said that when the sun slid low and the air turned gold, you could almost hear Bear on the breeze, speaking a lesson plain and clear. Sometimes saving one child saves a whole world. We grow older and learn that small choices can leave deep marks on the land and the people around us. Caleb Whitmore's life proves it. Faced with a starving child from a nation his neighbors called an enemy, he chose compassion over fear. It wasn't safe. It wasn't easy. But it was right, and it changed everything. For those who have lived through years of change, conflict, and repair, Bear's quiet bravery rings true. It teaches a hard-won truth. Kindness holds more power than violence ever will. We have seen how fear splits towns and anger burns bridges. Mercy, plain, honest mercy, can stitch wounds and build trust where none existed. In later years, that lesson settles even deeper. We know the sting of regret and the cost of missed chances to do good. Bear's story reminds us it's never too late to act with grace, even when the world tells us to harden our hearts. If we can choose understanding over judgment, if we can offer a hand instead of pointing a finger, we leave behind something better than wealth or a big name. We leave proof that courage isn't only about holding a line. Sometimes it's about knowing when to bend, when to give, and when to open your door to a stranger on a hot Texas morning.